I want to talk to you about the price of your energy bill. Don't forget, Labour, of course, promised originally that they would take £300, I think it was, off your bills. They then kind of somehow spun it as a win that it would be £150. Don't quite know how that works. But anyway, now it's been claimed that the Labour Party are going to increase your bills, essentially, for the next 2 decades. This is all about, essentially, these contracts for difference, the price that we'll be paying for wind power. They've just signed a deal. I'm simplifying things here, but they've just signed a deal for the next 20 years. And it was a very expensive deal at that. Jacqueline Foster, your thoughts?
Well, you're quite right. He's apparently now just signed, we've only just found out too, a deal for £1.8 billion where they're going to build 4 wind farms. And obviously there's all the subsidies and all the contracts are part of all of that. Look, I think most of us are fully aware and fully supportive of the fact that you need to look for alternative sources of energy. And I think we've made real progress over the years. But fundamentally, when you are running an industrialised society like we are with the populations that we have, we know we need things like what were North Sea gas. We were the coal industry, King Coal was the king. I mean, we built the industrial revolution on coal and steel and all of those things. So we have got the will and we have got the scientists, and we've had a lot of investment into alternative ways to basically run this country and industry. But it seems to me, I'm not sure whether he's quite well, because it seems to me every time he turns round, this is Ed Miliband, he seems to come up with another wheeze. And anybody that sort of challenges that, we're all we're going to be climate change deniers, which we're clearly not. But notwithstanding that, we cannot power this nation relying on wind. We just can't. And I think we saw the figures last week. There was one day, and I think we were getting something like 9% of our energy from wind. And so, therefore, the fact that they decided then to pull the licences from the North Sea, when we do need, that's what we actually need. We need fossil fuel. We need all of these things to keep going. We equally can't store, any extra sort of energy coming from a wind farm. It's just, destroying Aberdeen. It's basically destroying part of our industry, and that we have the Norwegians and others who are actually escalating their use and their drilling because they know how to run a country. So I mean, your bills aren't going down, everybody. He's tried to tell us last week that, the bills were going down £150 a year, a couple of quid a week. And then we have this massive coal spell. So, I don't know, it seems as though you're knocking on, as we used to say in the North, you're knocking on the door and there's nobody in. Because as much as we try and say, we need to have a good balance here, and we need to not be hostile towards, obviously, the oil and gas industry. It's just not sinking in.
There's nothing more important than keeping your money and your identity safe online. And with so many VPN options available, choosing the right one can be pretty daunting. But this video's sponsor, ExpressVPN, is making the choice easier for GB News viewers. ExpressVPN is offering up to 75% off, plus 4 extra months free. That's top-level security from just £2.49 a month, and you're covered by their 30-day money-back guarantee. So just click the link in this video's description or scan the QR code now. Remember, when you're online, you are often sharing personal data, so hackers can steal your information, your passwords, your photos, and your bank details in just seconds. But ExpressVPN encrypts your connection, making it virtually impossible for hackers to access your personal information. So why choose ExpressVPN? Well, it couldn't be easier to use. With just one click, you are protected. And ExpressVPN uses military-grade AES 256 encryption, which is the same standard trusted by the US government to guard their classified information. With their new tiered plans, you can protect up to 14 devices at once and manage passwords securely. Live chat support is available 24/7, and it typically connects you in under a minute with a real person. Click the link in this video's description or scan the QR code to get up to 75% off ExpressVPN, plus 4 months extra for free. Start protecting yourself today with ExpressVPN.
Aaron Bastani?
So the ambition for Labour is to decarbonise our electricity system as quickly as possible. That's not all energy, it's the electricity grid. So you'd still have things like, petrol and gas used for maritime and aviation and cars and heating with gas systems, but electricity would come from renewable sources. That has some downsides. In the short to medium term, it's going to mean that costs are higher. I think the really big problem, because I'm a fan of wind being part of the mix for two reasons. Firstly, we have lots of it, and it can't just be cut off or be subject to the whims of the global energy market because there is a war or a revolution somewhere else. Secondly, because it helps us meet certain ambitions with regards to decarbonising. It can't, however, be the majority of the energy mix. That's not really plausible for a few reasons. As Jacqueline said, you can't store wind, you can't store solar. This is called intermittency. These are often disrupted sources of energy. So how do you meet the gap? Historically, we've used gas. But of course, if you want to get away from fossil fuels, you can't use gas anymore. And I think the big mistake this country has made over the last 25 years is to not build more nuclear power stations. We should have built more nuclear power stations rather than shut them down. We've forgotten that. We've lost that muscle memory. Britain, believe it or not, was the first country in the world to have a large civilian nuclear power station. Anywhere on Earth, it was here. Now Britain can't build those kinds of pieces of infrastructure without help from France, which I think is really saying something about how badly we've been governed over the last 70 years or 60 years. So that would be my two bobs worth, is that really nuclear, as Jacqueline says, you need these kinds of forms of power to run an industrial economy. If you want to build things and export things and have a high standard of living, you can't do that just off wind. So on the one hand, I understand why Miliband's doing this. He's got a target, he wants to reach it. But if you don't have nuclear as part of that mix, I think things are going to go wrong really quickly. And I say that as somebody who's sympathetic to green causes. Because if you do it and people actually feel worse off, and it's contributing to a sense that living standards are declining rather than improving, you lose consent for that agenda. So I would like to see more nuclear, but I'm very positive about wind and solar. There's a lot of that to go around in this part of the world.
But this net zero lunacy, that some would call it obsession, that's going to cost us goodness knows how much more money in the long run, this was kicked off by the Tories.
It was, yeah. It was Theresa May.
I know.
And at the time, they thought, 10 years ago, going back, they thought it was a good idea. Obviously, as time went on, I think we realised it wasn't actually the right idea, because there has to be a balance. I mean, if you're going to make substantial changes to the way we live in this country, you've got to take the public with you. And I think where Aaron's actually right, and I've always said, if you explain something to people and you say, this is the way we can do this, there may be an initial cost initially, but it was the way they became fanatical, remember, over heat pumps. No, I don't want a heat pump. Now, if any of you watching have got a heat pump, that's fine by me. I don't want one. At this moment in time, I don't want an electric car. I've got a diesel and I've got a petrol. But if you want one, then that's fine. And it's about, actually, the markets determine at the end of the day what we can do. But it's got to be cost effective. We can't have politicians sitting there with these grand ideas, because it's the public that have to pay for these sorts of things. And that's not being taken into account. So we did reverse where we were, to be fair, and we said it's got to be done now in a much more sensible way. What Labour Party have done with Ed Miliband is really just continue actually in completely the wrong direction.
Do you know, one of my viewers, Michael, just said, Michelle, before that last break, you said there's something not right in this country. He's just said, I would say that most things are not right in this country. I would challenge you to find the single one that is. But on these net zero things, I would just love, it's not possible, I know that, but I would just love to have this ability and facility where all of you people that are into net zero and all the rest of it, you could have a voluntary surcharge. You guys could pick up the bill. So then you could sit there in your heat-pumped bath and you could lay back knowing that actually you're going to get your goal, you're going to get your net zero and you're paying for it. Everyone else that thinks it's a load of old cobblers can just crack on with life and cheaper bills, as was once the case. I know I live in dream world, I know. But look, I want to talk to you